Please introduce yourself when you are ready, and you have 20 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Phillip, and I'm the founder and CEO of SSi Micro. With me today are Dean Proctor, SSi's Chief Development Officer, and Mary McDonald, our External Regulatory Counsel. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the long hours the Commission has put into these hearings. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss our perspective on the wireless industry. And given that this is the last day, I will attempt to be briefer than I normally am. Our main message to you today is that no market is too small or too remote to benefit from local competition. As most of you know, SSi is a northern company with headquarters in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. Our company specializes in remote area infrastructure involving connectivity and innovative energy solutions. Our business model is based on true partnerships with local stakeholders to provide broadband, mobile, and other related services across Canada's north. We do this using our own infrastructure and facilities. We were intrigued by the Competition Bureau's presentation before you last week, in which they showed a map of Canada, highlighting where competing mobile network operators are present. Sadly, the map did not include northern Canada, which of course is our principal base of operations. And I trust that the hearing is not just about service delivery in 1/3 of Canada. We launched SSi Mobile in 2018 and became the first company to deliver mobile services in all of Nunavut's 25 communities, as well as in Yellowknife, using state-of-the-art 4G LTE and 2G GSM technologies. Prior to 2018, these communities had no access to cell service of any kind. And today, they have extremely competitive services at the same price in any community, no matter the size. The smallest, by the way, is 129 people. The largest in Nunavut, about 8,000. And the largest in our market area is Yellowknife at 20-some thousand. We're successful in these capital-intensive, highly regulated field, working in remote areas with a small population base because we innovate and invest with a focus on the needs of the communities we serve. We leverage ideas and technology tied together by our own custom software to offer solutions that would be impossible otherwise. We've been doing this for the last 27 years, and not just in Canada, but around the world. Let me take a moment to explain our operations. We're a facilities-based and hold spectrum licenses from the Government of Canada for both fixed and mobile wireless services. Our original 2,500 megahertz spectrum was transferred to us from Microcell back in 2004. We've also acquired 1,900 megahertz spectrum through a first-come, first-served process. We've purchased 3,500 megahertz spectrum, and courtesy of good relations developed with Rogers, we received spectrum sublicenses and swapped spectrum with them. We've also successfully implemented a two-way roaming agreement with Rogers that's highly appreciated by our customers. I want to highlight the fact that Rogers has proven to be invaluable in our success as a facilities-based network operator and in the expansion of our operations. One item the Commission should note is that SSi has never been able to acquire mobile spectrum through the auction process, despite having participated in 6 auctions since 2008. We know our markets very well, and in each case, the prices for spectrum were quite simply too high to make a business case. This is a major barrier for operators trying to expand service offerings in unserved or underserved markets. I'm going to turn it over to Dean now to talk about our perspective as it relates to the specific issues being addressed.
Thank you. When the Commission initiated this proceeding, you announced it would focus on 3 key areas. First, competition in the retail market. Second, the wholesale mobile regulatory framework with a focus on MVNOs. And thirdly, the future of mobile wireless services in Canada, with a focus on reducing barriers to infrastructure deployment. As a facilities-based wireless operator in Canada's north, we're interested in all three of these issues. They all come back to the Commission's approach to the regulation of wholesale markets, which sustain present and future competition in the retail markets for mobile wireless. Let me address the first issue, competition in the retail market. Although we are the first to market mobile services in most of the communities we serve, we've continued to invest heavily, evolving our service offerings so that customers continue to value them as other choices become available. For instance, we've recruited and trained community service providers in each one of our communities as a local point of contact, of assistance, and of access to handsets. They also provide a local face in each hamlet, village, and town we serve. We designed our simple, no-contract service plans to meet the needs of the people we serve based on their input, and we're dedicated to enriching those packages as we continue to innovate. But providing local service in the north requires access to wholesale backbone transport to connect with the rest of the world. When that backbone, or rather where that backbone, is controlled by others, whether it be satellite or fiber, we're constantly fighting for fair, open access at reasonable rates. Backbone transport is a key part of the wholesale regulatory framework for mobile. A point to take away is that an independent wireless network operator can open new markets and can offer a competitive alternative in other markets, even in Canada's most remote and sparsely populated regions. We're the living proof of that. To be clear, we firmly believe that no market is too small or too remote to benefit from facilities-based competition. Let me touch briefly on the third area of your focus, reducing barriers to future infrastructure deployment. And Vice Chair Lesner, you've asked if there's any regulatory intervention the Commission could make to develop more favorable market conditions for service-based competitors other than mandating wholesale MVNOs. The answer to that's yes. Throughout this proceeding, we've attempted to point out that competition in the retail market depends on a healthy wholesale market. Rather than designing specific regulatory measures for retail markets, we strongly believe the Commission must be focusing on ensuring that wholesale arrangements support competition by local and regional wireless service providers. We've advocated a regulatory framework that ensures facilities-based wireless carriers have open access to key upstream inputs, including sufficient backbone transport facilities, whether that be fiber or satellite, as well as suitable gateway facilities, which some have referred to as passive infrastructure. We've pointed out that all local wireless service providers must be allowed affordable access to backbone connectivity without unjust discrimination or undue preference if effective competition is ever to develop in the local services market. And we urge the Commission to place more emphasis on lowering barriers to service entry and ensuring the ILECs cannot abuse their dominant positions, including by restricting competitor access. Not a new position for SSi, as I'm sure you'll recognize. It's the essence of our Camilluk proposal, first presented to the Commission in 2016. We laid out in the Camilluk proposal a detailed plan for a truly open backbone and gateway facilities. This, in turn, will spur on innovation, investment, competition, and choice in even the smallest communities. We do note the Commission recently initiated a separate proceeding to address barriers in delivering USO-level broadband across Canada. But as we're highlighting today, there is a need for open access to adequate transport and gateway facilities for all broadband services, whether delivered through fixed or mobile networks. And Commissioner MacDonald, last week you asked if Eastlink would be interested in becoming an MVNO in Iqaluit. It's probably worth noting that since MVNOs function by using excess capacity of the MNO, until such time as there's much more capacity, backbone capacity available in Nunavut, it's difficult to contemplate MNOs in that region, mandated or not, MVNOs rather. That said, please rest assured we continue to work with excellent local partners to improve service and expand our markets. But the need remains for greater backbone connectivity, greater backbone capacity, and more investment into gateway infrastructure. Specifically, there's a need for Camilluk. I'll now turn it over to Mary.
Thanks, Dean. Let me start by emphasizing the Bureau's November 2019 conclusion that the market power of the dominant carriers extends to both retail and wholesale markets. These carriers enjoy high market share by any of the measures that the Bureau employs. High barriers remain to entry into mobile wireless markets across Canada. In this respect, we underscore the considerable advantages enjoyed by incumbents, most notably the large ILEC-affiliated ones, over any independent or new entrant. Those advantages include both high sunk capital investment and an overwhelming share of the available scarce spectrum. As a company that prides itself on its wireless technology and its disruptive potential, we appreciate the Bureau's endorsement of regional carriers' impact on retail market competition. However, we disagree with the Commissioner's proposed remedy for 3 reasons. First, although the Bureau finds market failure extends to both retail and wholesale markets, its proposed remedy for the failure to develop a competitive wholesale market seems to consist of constraining MVNO entry to a very few players for a very short period of time. In our view, while the Bureau's proposed remedy would result in relatively little additional burden being placed on the limited network resources that dominant carriers already devote to wholesale, it does nothing to address the fact there is no incentive for them to offer facilities at the wholesale level. Bell, for one, has clearly stated that it will not raise or invest capital to build capacity to develop a wholesale business. This aligns closely with the position they've been taking in other public policy forums for the past couple of years, and which we noted in our May 2019 submission. Bell does not want to build or make available on a wholesale basis any network capacity above and beyond what they anticipate that they can sell to their own retail customers at retail profit margins. For its part, TELUS has alleged that its investment in mobile wireless facilities will collapse if it's forced to develop wholesale offerings for MVNOs. Now, other interveners have expressed a healthy skepticism about this threat as it applies to facilities that MNOs such as TELUS use to offer retail services. But it does seem clear that TELUS is also not interested in developing wholesale offerings. For a lively MVNO market to develop, Canada will need facilities available on wholesale terms. And the fact remains that the major integrated ILECs and their affiliates are by far the best positioned under current Canadian ownership rules to raise the capital necessary to build networks that can support wholesale services as well as retail. SSi has experienced the effect of the ILEC's privileged position almost every time that the federal government has auctioned mobile wireless spectrum in any band as the bid prices reach stratospheric levels. And as Jeff highlighted earlier, that places the cost of auction spectrum beyond any price that we could justify economically, even with approaches such as spectrum set-asides in place. Jeff also mentioned our appreciation for the relationship we've developed with Rogers and their openness, relative openness anyway, to enter into sublicensing and other arrangements with us. But even there, seeking ministerial approval for sublicenses can sometimes be a lengthy process. We need timely approvals. Our second concern with the Bureau's proposal is timing. In suggesting that mandated MVNO entry should persist for only a short period of time, the Bureau is relying very heavily on its own finding that certain disruptors can achieve significant and lasting improvements in retail markets by rolling out their networks more quickly. From the perspective of SSi, when we acquire spectrum, we do so to build a network, and the sooner the better. If we were to devote limited resources to creating an MVNO in our licensed territory, we would eventually have to move customers from that MVNO to our own network. It goes without saying that those efforts will take significant time and resources away from the already challenging tasks associated with building and launching our own network. Like many others, we doubt the feasibility of ending mandated MVNO access on any fixed schedule. If network build-out is delayed for any reason, or if a voluntary wholesale market doesn't develop, enforcing such a hard end to a policy would be disruptive and costly for the very consumers who are supposed to benefit. And even if the Commission were willing to enforce a hard end, we've heard more wishful thinking than helpful suggestions for what happens to an MVNO's customers in the event it's forced out of business. The Bureau itself assumes the disruptor MVNO will have been able to build its own network-based business in the time of the limited window under the proposal it's made. And so at the end of that window can transition all customers to its own network. ExploreNet alternatively suggests the disruptor MVNO can keep its customers even if it cannot transfer them to its own network, so long as it promises not to serve any new customers on wholesale facilities secured from the MNOs. and others simply assume that these retail customers are so inherently valuable, no matter who they are or where they live, that they'll be snapped up quickly by another carrier. Before I hand this back to Jeff, let me quickly address our third problem with the Bureau's proposal, which dovetails with our main concern about Cogeco's HMNO proposal. Like the Bureau, Cogeco would limit HMNO eligibility to players already in a given geographic market. This helps only existing service providers who intend to make their offerings more attractive by adding mobile services. The quad play that you've heard so much about over the past 2 weeks. It does not encourage investments in wireless facilities. Jeff?
Thank you, Mary. In closing, our biggest concern with many of the MVNO proposals placed before you is that they have little to do with competition or with making retail markets more attractive for consumers, or at the end of the day, with actually growing the market. The problem is that with too many proposals, it invites the Commission to pick an MVNO winner. And they also invite you to believe that you can have competition where everyone wins and no one will lose. To do this, some impose strict geographic restrictions on eligibility to become an MVNO, prioritizing wireline carriers already in the market. Some would limit mandated MVNO access to those who already have spectrum in the same area. Others still would exclude a facilities-based wireless carrier operating in any region of Canada from being an MVNO in any other region, or strictly limit the number of possible MVNOs. These parties would have you believe that without the name recognition out of an incumbent cable company or an ILEC, the business will fail. Some argue that unless they can bundle mobile and landline services they already sell, they will not achieve acceptable profitability, which they think should somehow be the Commission's concern. The fundamental problem with so many of these proposals is that they will in fact limit consumer choice, investment and innovation, the very hallmarks of competition. Like Henry Ford, they're trying to convince you that you can have a car of any color so long as it's black. SSi's own record of innovation, investment, and competitive services, even in the smallest and most remote markets, should put an end to all of that nonsense. It's often said that a competitive market without the chance of failure is like heaven without hell, and somehow that concept just doesn't work. The Commission must be careful not to assume that the decisions coming out of this proceeding will or indeed should guarantee success for all who enter the mobile market. Your decisions must instead focus on approaches that will make a positive difference for consumers and that will improve the quality, choice, and cost of wireless services. We've told you how we believe it can best be done with a focus on backbone transport and open gateways. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to appear today and would welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Commissioner McDonald.
Good morning, and thank you for your opening comments. I appreciate a statement you made a few moments ago about no community or region being too small or too remote for facilities-based competition. And I note that you operate and deliver services to Canadians in very remote and very challenging environments. So I'm interested in the perspective that you bring to this proceeding. I guess just to start off, and it comes a few questions around some of the promotional material that you provided with your opening submission this morning. I'd just like to get a sense as to the breadth of everything that you're providing in the markets right now. And your promotional material outline four plans that you have in market ranging from $25 to $110 per month with different features. Are those all the plans you have in market, or do you have other, perhaps less popular plans that just don't make it to the level of making it into your brochure?
No, the only plan that is not listed in the marketing is one of them that we call a utility plan that we built for specific clients that monitoring fire control panels or security systems that don't require a significant amount of data can't afford to pay for the data plans on such a high level. So we've introduced one which is a utility plan. And it's on the website, I believe, but not in the marketing. But that's the only other plan. Every other plan is offered at the same price, at the same level in every market that we serve, and it's delivered by, as Dean said, a local agent.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
if
I could just add too, under our Kinnick broadband services, we actually offer a mobile Wingle, which is a data-only plan, which is not listed under SSi Mobile.
And what's the price point on that?
They're the same price points as we have for the residential, so beginning at $80 a month, which is a subsidized service.
Okay, thank you. And with the plans, the four that are outlined in your brochure, I know you give the option of bringing your own device, but do those four plans include a device, or is the device extra, or BYOD?
Either. We sell devices. Our agents in every community have inventory for local customers that come in to sign up, but we also allow you to bring your own device and just buy a SIM card.
And again, just to complete Jeff's answer, we sell separately the handsets, so we do not bundle a service package with the handset.
So this is the price just for the service? And
Correct, and predominantly because we're a prepaid service, not a contract service, so we don't enforce a 2-year term or anything like that where we would be subsidizing handset as part of the bundle.
Okay, thanks.
It's month to month.
And
given the market too, just to add a little more to that, we offer a limited variety of handsets in the communities, but we make certain that we have something that is available for each one of the customer types. So the entry level or more economical phones up to higher end smartphones.
Okay, thank you for that. And on your website, I noticed that you have rollover gigs, and we've talked about that with a couple of other interveners in the process, and I'm just wondering what the features of that particular option look like for your customers. If they have unused data, does it roll over forever? Does it expire after a specific period of time? What flavor of that are you putting into the market?
We've introduced a service that we call pay-as-you-go. So basically, you can buy a basic package, any one of these, the NetSaGAC 50, which includes 2 gig and, Canada-wide data. And if you want to go over that, you can put money into your pay-as-you-go wallet, we'll call it, and it will draw from that if you want to go over. You can buy excess usage. So we have 2 methods, I guess, to be very clear. We have one method where you can buy some usage, which is only good for this service period. It will expire at the end. Or you can buy usage which will roll over. We give you the option of either. And that usage doesn't expire, even if your plan should, because we're a month-to-month service. Our current documentation says that if you're back in service within 90 days, your usage still exists, but truthfully, we do not expire that pay-as-you-go balance at this point within any time frame, because our customers cannot afford in these rural areas to be on a contract, right? I think that's maybe clear to everybody. We don't have banks, we don't have credit cards in a lot of cases. A lot of it is cash. And there's a very high unemployment in a lot of these communities, as high as 40%, which means that you may be 6 weeks between a paycheck or between enough money to be able to reactivate an account. And the development of our services, our service delivery, our model has come about from the fact that I grew up in a town of 800 people in the Northwest Territories. I understand these challenges very, very well. And you will not sell service in a remote and rural community if you require a bank account, a credit history, a credit card, on a 2-year contract. So we have designed and tailored our plans and continue to become attractive to the consumers that we serve and the markets that we serve. So we have both. We've introduced this rollover gigs recently, but we also have expiring gigs, if you want to call it that.
Okay, thanks for that. And you touched on the economic situation of many of the Canadians that you serve. We had conversations with other facilities-based providers over the last 2 weeks who have low-cost plans within the market, perhaps even similar in features to what you offer for $25. And to paraphrase, the basic response was, we offer it, but no one takes it. In the geography that you provide service, what would what's your uptake been of your $25 plan?
I'll be as polite as I can be. Our uptake is high. I mean, if you look at the disposition of users amongst all of our plans, you would find that the very large number of them are on a lower end plan. But you would also find that our consumers switch plans very easily, because when your month is up, you can just stack another ticket on top. So you can literally go into the portal and say, next month I want a better plan. Halfway through the month, you could upgrade your plan. So I don't believe that there is no market for it. And frankly, maybe a better question is, what is the cost of offering a lower end plan? The network exists, the billing, the marketing, the people, the staff, the support. The cost is a lower margin, frankly. And we're maybe not accustomed to the margins that are made in some of the bigger markets. Maybe we just grew up in a little smaller diet. But no, those plans are necessary. In fact, I would argue that, as Dean has pointed out, the critical aspect of delivering in these areas is access to dedicated backbone capacity, not shared, not obfuscated with no SLA or no QoS, which is typically what we've been fighting. Access to dedicated backbone at reasonable rates. I would like to say at rates comparable to the South, but I don't think that's necessarily realistic given the satellite market we operate in without significant subsidies. But let's say reasonable rates so that we can deliver a reasonably priced service to the consumer with a good quality of service. Right? That's our goal. And so, to end it there, because again, I'll get too long-winded. No, there's no problem selling those lower-end plans. Those plans should exist, and if the consumer really doesn't want it, then you won't put it on your list. But frankly, putting it on doesn't cost much.
I probably should just let you speak, because I think you were starting to go down the road that I'm about to go down right now. We've asked most providers to comment on some of the proposals put forward by the consumer groups. Notably, the Coalition for Cheaper Wireless Service had suggested a $25 to $30 plan, unlimited voice and text, and 40 gigs of data. That would compare perhaps most closely to your $80 plan that you have in the market, and you highlighted some of the additional expenses and higher costs that you face in delivering service. When we asked others, we were told by some that such a plan would be at or below their costs. I assume that would also be the case for you if such a plan were mandated.
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is I can't see how it could possibly be implemented without the Commission staff having 100 more people to investigate every market and look at every business case, because, I mean, we've worked in Africa, Indonesia, the South Pacific, every community in the Northwest Territories, every community in Nunavut, as well as many in Southern Canada, and the reality is the business case is different in every one. So short of a large carrier choosing to, and many do, cross-subsidize their entire model and lose money on some, like, how would you possibly manage it? Like, to suggest that a certain number of gigs should be mandated as a minimum level of service to be delivered by any carrier, I think is folly. I think if we want to get into something like that, it really should become more of a consumer subsidy to purchase a package and let the competitive market determine what the best package is, because otherwise it becomes very complicated to manage. And I'm all for cheaper packages, right? And you hinted, Commissioner MacDonald, at our higher costs. let's put that in perspective. Our power rates are 700% higher. Our data rates are $1,000 a unit versus $10 a unit for wholesale backbone, right? Our labor costs, our transport costs, our infrastructure, our heat costs, it is dramatically higher. So I would find it would be very difficult for somebody to come to me and say, Jeff, can you deliver that for $20 a month? I mean, I'd be happy to show all the numbers and say, well, tell me how, because short of somebody giving me backbone at $10 a meg, it's just not possible. So no, I think it is folly to suggest that there needs to be a plan, and that plan should be the same everywhere and at the same price, because I think it becomes very hard to regulate. And I won't go into it. I think Dean is itching to jump in with something on BAP. Are you? Is that it?
No, thanks, Jeff. I just wanted to add a bit. When Jeff mentioned that perhaps a large national carrier could do it on a cross-subsidy basis, I just want to underscore the horribly negative ramifications that would have on competition in the markets in which we operate or other smaller carriers operate, which, again, if there's an idea of mandating a certain type of low-level but high-data consumer price plan, it's kind of running contrary to the purpose of this hearing and to the purpose of competition, which is to allow innovation and which is to encourage new entrants to come in. By putting in place data plans, voice combined with data plans that are under cost in the markets which need competition, you will be nipping competition in the bud, not encouraging it. And I really want to stress that.
And I want to make sure that, because Dean, you make a good point, and thanks for clarifying it. If I didn't let enough venom into that statement, I would not support the idea. And frankly, given that I grew up in the Northwest Territories and still live there, this is a living nightmare for me. I see a large ILEC with an operation in the north utilizing its large ILEC status to kill all competition. The Yukon's got none. The Northwest Territories has one competitor left, us. And in Nunavut, we're in every community because they aren't able to use their position, their status on the fiber backbone to thwart our competitiveness. We own our own backbone in Nunavut. So it would be a very bad idea, I guess, to end at that.
And I appreciate your comments around the fact that such a plan, in your context, would be below cost. One of the other, putting cost aside for a moment, one of the other criticisms against mandating one specific plan is it puts all low-income Canadians into one bucket, and that the features of that particular plan may not be best suited for their individual needs and the way they use their device. So, and I think I know the answer to your question because you mentioned a possible subsidy later. Are you of the view that a subsidy, however such a subsidy came to fruition, that would allow a low-income user to pick the plan that best suits them would be a better fit, or perhaps additional funding provided or consideration taken when calculating low-income subsidies?
Absolutely. I think that if we were to look at this very holistically without our ILEC carrier operator status hat on, and we just said as Canadians and as business people what might be the best outcome, the best model, it's obvious, right? Provide everyone a fair playing field. Provide backbone at an equivalent price in every market. That's where the Commission can regulate and mandate, is to say, no, we're going to have $10 a megabit in Grise Fiord. And if that means it's a $900 a megabit subsidy, so be it. Because then every competitor that wants to truly deliver service in that market has access to a backbone at an equivalent and fair price, equivalent to the South. And then secondly, we need to open up facilities in those markets, open gateways, and that is the basis of Kimberley. And if you are new and haven't heard that, I would encourage everybody to go look. And the simplest thing, and it actually stands for Wales Backbone in Inuktitut, but the easiest way to remember it is Kimberley. It's Q-I-M-I-R-L-U-K. And really it talks about, and we laid that plan out without our SSi hat on. We laid it out as if, and I said specifically to funders, it doesn't matter who wins this competition if you do it this way, because whoever wins it is obligated to operate it on a fair and open basis, and we will be a customer. If they can outbid us on operating the backbone and the open gateway, we'll just become a client of it. But I think we're probably more innovative, and we will probably win that, and we'll run it as an open backbone, which is what we promised with Kimberlook. And it still is needed. So provide an open gateway, provide what Dean calls the passive assets, or others have, those critical pieces, you know, the tower, the building, the backup power, the local trained people to manage the infrastructure, because we're talking about stuff in remote and rural areas. Provide the jobs, right? That will open up competition.
Just maybe one final question on your promotional material before I move on. We heard from a group, I believe it was yesterday, and they were talking about the challenges that many vulnerable Canadians feel when interacting with their service providers, particularly accessing services online. And I notice in your material this morning that you provide a card. I assume it's delivered with an individual's device when they sign up, how to activate the device and get the services that they've purchased. Do your customers face any challenges with doing this? I mean, it seems very straightforward to me, but
it's a great question, and I'll take a moment to actually promote the fact that I think we are one of those companies that probably meets the Language Commission, closer than anyone else in Nunavut. We have gone to great lengths to make our website, our captive portal, bilingual and language aware. We are, in fact, developing new markets now in southern Canada, which will include French being dynamically translated on that website, and our marketing will come out in it. So, we do go to great lengths to make sure that our material is available in the language of the people that we serve. That's important. I believe that. Secondly, we write all of our own software that integrates our systems together. We rely on very little software from others. And so when you look at that card that I think that you're referring to, whether it's in the English or the Inuktitut, the activation code that is on that SIM card is something that our software recognizes. So when a customer in Grise Fiord or Qikiqtarjuaq goes to the local agent's home or place of business to sign up for an account, they literally can sit there with that person and be signed up in about 5 minutes. Or they can take the device and the SIM card and the activation card and go home and connect to the portal and punch in that activation code, and the system knows what that device is, and then they can choose a plan. Now, in a lot of cases, as I said, there are no credit cards because there are no banks, and partly this is because we haven't had driver's licenses either, or street names, right, or addresses in most of these communities. So you couldn't just phone Bank of Montreal in Ottawa and say, I'd like to set up an account, I'm Jeff. And they say, what's your address? And you make something up, literally. I was at number 1 Mackenzie Drive for most of my life because there were no street numbers. But I was on the Mackenzie River, and I figured that was a good street number. The post office in the community didn't really give a shit what the street address said, because you had to go pick it up at the window at the post office at the northern store. So are there barriers? No, not in our service. That's why we have a local agent in the community that gets a percentage of the revenue, not the margin, the revenue off the top. We put over $1.6 million a year back into the communities of Nunavut by giving a percentage of our revenue back to the agent in the community. The barriers faced in our communities are barriers when you have to deal with a telco that lives in the south, that has a call center overseas, that doesn't speak your language and doesn't have your device in stock and can't take a cash payment.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm looking at your opening remarks this morning, and you mentioned that until there's more backbone capacity available going to Nunavut, it would be difficult to contemplate an MVNO mandated or not. So I take it from that you've obviously not been approached by another potential MVNO trying to seek access to your network, but have you looked at approaching other service providers to seek MVNO access so that you could launch in areas outside of Nunavut?
That's a great question. Yes, we have sought, I'll call it co-location status in other ILEX facilities in the north, in Nunavut, in the Northwest Territories, and prior to us building our own network in Nunavut. And as I'm sure you are well aware, much like we have mandated tower sharing, try to get access to an ILEX tower. And you will find out that before the engineering study starts, you're going to commit 6 months to try to get a discussion. Then you're going to commit to a large potential bill for the first engineering study to be told there's no space left on it. Been there, done that, lived it. We started building our own towers. When we built the network in Nunavut in 2004, there was no broadband provider. There was Northwest Tel with copper, dial-up, long distance, $1.10 a minute, dial-up. Didn't work. So we built infrastructure. We built facilities in every community in Nunavut. Towers, buildings, yards, dishes, multiple dishes for redundancy, multiple dishes for capacity. We trained local agents. And yes, we've been approached by people that would love to move into our facility. And that facility is a 20-foot container with a 60-foot tower and 2 4.5-meter C-band antennas and a local agent. There isn't the air conditioning capacity, there isn't the physical capacity, there isn't the security, there isn't the physical access control, because in 2004, when we built that, even though we have since then invested $75 million of our own money against $75 million in funds from the federal government, we are 50% matching funds in building out Nunavut. Nobody else has done that in most territories that are rural. We have. The facilities aren't enough. And years ago, we identified that, and we said, look, if we truly want competition, and this comes from the heart. I grew up in Fort Providence where I wanted to compete, but I wasn't a telco. I was a kid in a community of 800 people. We built a computer company. We fought. We built a telecom company. We've spent millions in front of the commission in the last 10 years trying to open the market up, remove the monopoly, get into cellular. It's been a hell of a battle. We've had people come to us, and what I've said to them is, we'd love to host you, because competition, we've not been first to market in many markets. We usually were last in the market because we do a good job at it. But we can't entertain those other clients for a whole bunch of reasons. One is security of that data and having them have access without being a proper facility. So to end this, the proper answer is we need to invest in the infrastructure on the ground. We need open gateways that are shared by all so that we aren't picking a winner or a loser. We're enabling the community and the people that live there to develop services as well. So that's the basis of Kimberley, truly. And one last piece on that, the facilities are one part, the backbone is critical, and irregardless of backbone, right, and that's a big part of the underlying Kimberley model, is that each backbone coming in, might be satellite today, might be fiber tomorrow, is part of that shared service and is costed appropriately so that it is not a burden to the people living in the community. What I mean by that is, if Grise Fiord only has satellite, but you've got fiber in Iqaluit, the people in Grise Fiord should not pay a higher price for the fact that they live in a part of our country we desperately want them to live in.
Sorry, Commissioner McDonald, if I could just add a bit to the very narrow focus of MVNO. We've not been approached on the mobile side for MVNOs in our serving area. We have had resellers on our broadband network in the past, mostly in the west, fiber served by Northwest Tel's backbone. But given the price of backbone transport, our resellers weren't able to continue to make a business case, so they have one by one fallen off. But as best I know, we were the only provider of resale service on the broadband side. In terms of MVNO in the south, our approach, if it wasn't clear from the presentation, I think it was, we prefer to go forward building our own facilities. And that's what we're continuing to do outside of the markets that we're serving right now with local partners.
Perfect, thank you. On the topic of building facilities, just a point of clarity, paragraph 37, you say the Bureau's proposal does nothing to address the fact that there is no incentive for them to offer facilities at a wholesale level. I assume by them you're referring to the large national carriers, Or
That's right.
you, okay, so you weren't referring to the fact that that proposal from the Bureau would not lead to investment on the part of the potential new MVNOs, what would be the regional carriers right now?
That's right, although as I went on to say that it makes that investment. We're not entirely sure how a regional carrier is going to undertake the burden of becoming an MVNO for a short period of time while continuing that investment. But yeah, our point in paragraph 37 is exactly that we don't see an incentive from the Bureau proposal on an incentive structure built to induce, shall we say, the better funded players in this market to actually develop the facilities that would be required for wholesale.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. On the topic, if we did, and I know your views on the Bureau proposal, if we did go that particular route, what benefit do you think it would provide to the regional carriers that would be able to apply for that MVNO access, the Eastlinks, the Shaws of the world?
I'll go to that one. When you acquire spectrum, whether it's through sublicense, which is probably the most economical way to do it, or through a spectrum auction, you want to build a network of a certain quality and go after customers with a certain approach. By necessity, an MVNO regime, any level on the scale, is a resale regime. You will always be riding along a competitor's network with the limitations, no matter how it's regulated in terms of open or pricing, that constrict the quality of the service that you can provide to your own customers. At the same time, there are startup costs. There's a lot of time to set up an MVNO, no matter how regimented the Commission makes it, no matter how tight the negotiation timeframes or the tariffs may be set to encourage earlier entry. You're putting time and resources into that. Then you have to build your own network. And it's a truism that the first customer costs millions of dollars and it gets a lot cheaper after that. It becomes a diversion of assets, of activities, to continue to be building, nurturing an MVNO service, which may have lower quality attributes as well, which affects the brand that you might be trying to build on your own network. So for the Commission, or for the Bureau to be suggesting that MVNO is a good route to get to a facilities-based carrier, it gives you a shortcut to gather up market share. There's a lot of shortcomings to that. And it becomes an even greater shortcoming if there's a gun against your head saying, hey, 5 years from now, you have to stop all this. I mean, how does that work? The cost of switching over, whether there's eSIMs in place or not, the cost of switching over is very burdensome. Handsets may not match. So that means you're going to have to give everybody $200, $300, $400 handsets, maybe $1,000 handsets to bring them onto your network to encourage them. There's undoubtedly slippage, churn when you're moving over to your own network away from the MVNO's network. There may be perceptions of lower quality onto the new network rather than the old network. So I see so many, and I've lived through these, I might add, over the last 20 years in the industry, that there have been MVNOs, as I'm sure the Commission's aware. There are so many shortcomings in a mandated transfer over while you're building out a network MVNO status, as the Bureau is proposing, that I just can't see it being practically workable.
We'll get to the, as you called it, the gun to the head in a second or two. But what would you say, I mean, if a regional provider was successful in gaining MVNO access, would that not at least allow them to launch sooner, where they have spectrum, would allow them to launch sooner, begin to build their brand sooner, depending on the uptake among Canadians, make more informed decisions as to where they should invest in facilities next? Because largely when providers are trying to make those decisions now, yes, they based on a lot of data and best assumptions, but it is kind of a best guess as to what market share they're going to be able to gain in a particular community.
The answer briefly is yes, but I want to go back to some of my previous comments, which may have been a little not as tight as they could have been. Probably the best thing I see about entering in as an MVNO if you already have a spectrum license, or if you're thinking of getting a spectrum license, is whether or not there's actually a market for your services. So I suppose it avoids a problem if you find that you have absolutely no traction in a certain market. You don't have to bother going ahead and building. But tying that back to the Bureau's suggestion or their proposed structure, you have to already have spectrum, which means that you've made a costly mistake. You're going to become an MVNO and find out that there's actually no market for your services. I also want to highlight a couple of the points I raised earlier. You're not operating in your network. So yes, you may be able to enter a market quicker, but it's operating off of somebody else's network. There are quality attributes that may be greater or may be lesser when it comes time to move over. It may not be the type of services or the full richness of services that you could offer off of your own network. Bell talked about differentiation. You may not have the differentiation you want as an MVNO that you would definitely have if you had your own network. So sure, you can gather up some customers, but is it really the type of service that you want to have? And as I mentioned, there is going to be churn when you move those customers over to your own network. That's costly.
You've mentioned, and we've talked about the Bureau's proposal. You mentioned the Cogeco proposal in your opening comments. There are other flavors of MVNO. Just so I'm clear, is there any model that you would actually support?
In our evidence, in terms of mandated, we stayed to what's been defined as the full MVNO. Again, this is resale. This is open network access. This is something that SSi is doing very voluntarily, wants to do. That is Kimmerlich. The biggest concern we have, and we're trying to get that across, if in fact there's mandated MVNO access, there should be some requirements, such as Rogers had proposed, the provision of 911 services, the provision of other respect for legislation, such as the PIPEDA and all of that. Those are the types of restrictions that should be in place. There should not be other restrictions, such as ITPA is putting in place, saying you have to be a wireline carrier. That's folly. That denies innovation. That denies well, the market for competition. So as we're trying to get across, we believe the best way to go forward is to focus on the upstream backbone facilities and to focus on passive infrastructure. In other words, the gateway facilities, the towers. Spectrum is also a passive infrastructure, I might add, to allow local wireless carriers to build their own local wireless networks. It's actually quite economically achievable if you have the other pieces in place.
And that's understood, and your points are not being lost on us, so just be assured of that. Do you think that there is, given your experience negotiating with Rogers, I don't believe you've mentioned the other two national carriers, which might lead me to believe you haven't had the same level of success in your negotiations with them. Do you think there's any likelihood that an MVNO market in the country will develop if the access is not mandated?
I apologize. I'm not certain if it was actually shared with the Commission, even in confidence, but there are MVNOs operating. I'm just not certain.
Yes, sorry. I mean,
I'm just not certain what their market share is. So that's why I say I can't actually opine on that. I guess none of us can. Yeah,
I mean, just to provide a little extra color, yes, there are branded resellers out there today. Some have put forward that 5 years following our last decision that they would have expected a larger number of MVNOs to have come into the market and been successful in attracting a larger percentage of the subscribers than is presently the case.
The MVNO is going to have to be an excellent marketer. So branding's important, marketing skill and savvy is important. You shouldn't put up barriers to that in terms of who can actually become an MVNO. If I can go way back in time, because I was reading the Tech Savvy Australian report, and they talked about how MVNOs were invented in the UK with Virgin. The name was invented there. We can actually go back to Canada. Microcell, back in the day, created an open network. We didn't call it MVNO. That's classic Richard Branson in terms of marketing. But with Richard Branson's brand, with the Virgin brand, with the wherewithal and the desire to enter in, it became clear that he would be able to, and they're still operating in the market today, it's just it's 100% owned by Bell with a licensing deal from Branson. There are certain companies, brands, marketing skills that would likely lead to success in the marketplace, and if the business plan is there, that would be encouraging for any MNO, whether regional or otherwise, to enter into that relationship. Microcell at the time was in heavy negotiations with Virgin, only to lose out to Bell for the MVNO deal. So in other words, that was a brand, a player that was highly sought out as a non-regulated, non-mandated MVNO. So yes, it's possible. And again, Virgin's still operating today. It's just it's 100% owned by Bell with a license for the Virgin brand from Branson.
May I add to that?
Yes.
One of the things I think that came through to me fairly clearly listening to the testimony, particularly in the first week of this hearing, was the major MNOs saying, you know, if there's nothing in this for us, we're not going to negotiate with anybody. And I think Dean's given you an example of where a reseller, right, where a marketing-based entrant actually did have something to offer. Without something to offer, we're dubious about the development of a market organically, and because there hasn't been, because that MVNO market hasn't developed organically, we also aren't seeing the wholesale business, the wholesale facility, or the facilities available to create a wholesale business, if you like, on those national networks.
So I guess just to...
Sorry, Commissioner McDonald,
Yeah.
I probably have to close off on that one too. I apologize for all the back and forth. Microcell voluntarily opened up its network because of what I was talking about earlier, the first customer costing hundreds of millions of dollars and getting cheaper thereafter. When you put in place the network facilities that are good for a 5-year horizon, you don't have a lot of customers on that network to begin. So an open network policy actually allows you to have additional brands, additional marketing skills, additional reaches and distribution points into the community to build up your subscriber base, which pays down the network costs. So ironically, the voluntary basis for wholesale access for an MVNO could in fact come mostly from regional players who voluntarily open up their networks to help defray the startup costs of capital.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple more. If we did mandate MVNO access, do you think that the Commission would have to set, and I believe the answer is yes, would have to set a rate? And would you suggest that our traditional phase 2 costing approaches would be the best way to do that, or perhaps something more novel like a retail minus approach?
We've talked about this a lot, and the last couple of weeks and the last 15 years have been quite eye-opening on that regard. There's been a lot of reference to maybe we should start with the roaming rates as a basis, but a basis for what? I guess roaming represents one thing versus any number of variants in the MVNO components. At the same time, when we look at phase 2 costing, and this is a concern that has been raised by a number of players, and certainly is raised by us, we don't have access to all those costs. I continue to be mystified how Bell and Telus, with their really efficient model of network sharing, have voice and data prices in roaming that are more than double for voice over Rogers and a multitude of times over Rogers for text messaging. I can't figure that one out. So again, if we're to start from retail pricing, if we're to use phase 2 costing, which is probably the most logical, I might add, it's just that we cannot contribute a lot to that because we don't have access to the data. We don't have the skill sets of the larger players to really contribute meaningfully to that type of an analysis. Retail minus, and again, some people have been poo-pooing on retail minus. It's probably a much easier way to do it, to at least get started in the market. But again, retail minus against what if you're doing the RAN? retail minus might work when you're comparing roaming rates, as some people have been suggesting, but you guys had a very lengthy proceeding on phase 2 costing for roaming rates. So can you put that genie back in the bottle? This is a long and drawn-out answer to say that's a difficult task in front of you. Retail minus might be the cleanest, but as I say, when you're dealing with strictly a RAN, how do you do retail minus off of that? Should there be an interim rate, perhaps, before starting? I think that certainly makes sense. We have argued in front of you several times that if there is an interim rate, why not take the interim rate proposed by the competitor? Why not take a lower interim rate rather than the higher interim rate? Because that would definitely encourage entry rather than an interim rate which is too high to begin with. And at the same time, it becomes a sort of, without having arbitration, baseball arbitration, if in fact you're going to take the lower interim rate that's proposed, because the player that takes that rate, the new entrant that takes that rate, knows that if in fact they're wrong, they're going to have to make up the difference at the end of the day. So rather than the carrier paying back to the new entrant, it'd be the new entrant paying back to the carrier if in fact the commission adjusts rates one way or the other, upward or downward.
Thank you. Just one final question, and then my colleagues may have others. If MVNO access is mandated, it will be a significant change for the Canadian marketplace. And I think, depending on your point of view, that change could either be disruptive or it could be destructive. And at present, we know that rates are going down, perhaps not as fast as many would like. We know that the new entrants are investing in gaining new customers. Again, perhaps not as fast as we would like. No one has questioned the quality of Canadian networks. So I'll end it with just the question: MVNOs positively disruptive to the market or destructive to what appears to be working?
Just to add to that, there's actually a third option, which could become a big nothing. If, in fact, the rules are so restrictive that you only have oatmeal or a black-colored car entering the market, then it won't be destructive or disruptive. It will be kind of boring. The key that we want to emphasize is that the rules need to encourage innovation, new entrants, investment, and it's going to also encourage failure. People have to have the right to fail. They have to have the right to be able to try something new, and maybe it won't work, but that's what competition's all about. So I would just like to add a third option to it, which is, if the rules are so restrictive that nobody can actually play, even though you're opening it up, it won't do much of anything. But again, the hallmark of a competitive market is innovation. So destructive or disruptive, and that would lean more to the disruptive side. Destructive, I can certainly see the concerns of regional carriers who've invested a lot and have yet to cover their capital costs. I can see that. I'm very empathetic to the situation that they face. Pardon me, the concerns they face, given that they are actually still ramping up their own market shares. And that would be destructive in that case.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Barron.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your perspectives. I have a couple of additional questions I want to ask. I want to pick up on your point about the wholesale backbone and your position being that the currently negotiated rates are effectively a barrier to entry. Now, assuming the Competition Bureau's MVNO model was put in place, hypothetically, whether or not you took advantage of that model, would you not say that if regional facilities-based MVNO carriers introduced more competition into the retail market for the MNOs, that would then not render the wholesale market much more attractive for the MNOs as a potential source of additional revenues, and therefore that it would provide you with, I guess, a better wholesale backbone situation?
The answer would probably depend on where in the subscriber take-up scale that MNO, that particular MNO is. Do they have excess network capacity available or not? If not, they're going to have to build it to accommodate the MVNO. Pardon me, and that may then be sold at margins that are lower than they perceive on the retail side. The other aspect to this, I guess, is the whole question of how much wire is involved in a wireless network. This is why we focus on backbone. 4G already is a huge consumer of fiber, satellite backbone. 5G is going to be even more. So I suppose to the effect that an MVNO would actually augment the backbone transport capacity, sure, that would be good, but there has to be excess capacity for it to be of any quality.
Okay. And your view on capacity today? Because there have been parties that have posited that MNOs are potentially holding back capacity. Others have mentioned that there is no capacity for MNOs.
Last mile capacity?
MVNOs.
Sorry, last mile or backbone, because we have to really separate those.
Well, both actually.
I think there's a couple of things in this that I'm trying to convey or find a simple way to convey. So the question on backbone, it depends where you live. If you live in Grise Fiord, there's no backbone capacity. There's no diversity of backbone. It's congested. If you were to try to buy it from the competitor, there is nothing to ensure your quality of service. So how would you sell a differentiated service? This is the case in Nunavut right now, where the T19 capacity is being delivered into the community on a, quote unquote, basis for all competitors to be able to access. But the service contract that comes with that backbone access has no quality of service or no SLA. So there's no way I could compete with the person offering it to me. I can't use it because it doesn't. I can't offer you video conferencing if I don't know how bad the service is that I'm buying, because there's no quality of service. So is there backbone constraints? It depends on where we're talking about. If we were talking about downtown Toronto, you'd probably be able to buy whatever fiber you wanted at $10 a meg and just bring your own fiber in. It wouldn't even be an issue. But if you're talking about in Grise Fiord, you're talking about $1 million expense to put the hub infrastructure in, to put the antenna in, to put the building and the transmitters in. You're not going to be buying much backbone capacity, and then you have the cost in the sky. So Dean's comment about, it's important to differentiate between backbone and last mile is because in the north or in rural and remote areas, it doesn't matter if we're talking about markets in Africa we've worked in or Indonesia or the South Pacific. The problem is 180% different in a small remote rural market than it is in downtown Toronto. Downtown Toronto, there's lots and lots of backbone, but the last mile becomes congested because the number of people, the number of sites, how much spectrum you have, that becomes the problem. In rural Canada, while we can still have a spectrum problem because we can't afford to compete, even in set-asides typically, or has been proven, the last mile, if you have spectrum, is typically not your problem. It's the backbone out, and secondly, in these rural areas, it's the facilities that need to be built. So if every competitor has to build their own 3 towers, their own uplink, their own 2 antennas for redundancy, their own genset, that's a problem, right? Those are the passive assets, the building, the power, the local support, the antenna, the spectrum. But putting in your own RAN so you can differentiate your own service, putting in your own servers, putting in your own software, your own systems, that's what differentiates the service in my mind. And that's what makes the difference between somebody that succeeds and fails is whether or not they're a good service provider that deliver a good service. But in the South, to end this, backbone has typically not been the big challenge. In the north, backbone is absolutely the challenge, and access to facilities. If you want to encourage competition, you can't have the next entrant in the market have to build the same 3 towers on the same 3 hilltops in the same little community of 129 people, right, to cover them. It doesn't make sense.
May I add to that? You You've asked a number of the parties that have appeared before you how they plan their network and whether they build in excess capacity to them, and many of them have said, we build according to how we perceive what the market is going to be at the time that that build becomes effective for us to serve the market. You asked us a similar question in the July interrogatories or requests for information. We answered it in a similar way. It's from what I understand, and these guys know better, it's how these networks get built. But it's how these networks get built because these networks are oriented towards retail service. Right? What you're talking about, I think, with MVNO is trying to, is creating a revolution where in planning networks, those in a good position to plan networks and to roll networks out are also thinking about wholesale services. And as Dean said, and he and I were present at the creation all those years ago, that was Microcell's model. It thought it would be able to build a business in part on the basis of selling at wholesale as well as selling at retail. That's not the model that we see from the nationals or, frankly, the regionals that you've heard from in the last couple of weeks. People build networks on the basis of how they perceive what the market is going to be for their services at the time that network comes on board.
And I just want to add one last thing. I think this goes to the intent when you design and build that network, right? As Mary said, you intend to build a piece of infrastructure that is going to hit the sweet spot of what your projections are. You can't predict how many MVNOs, how many other carriers, how many other people need to be on the tower, how much additional backbone. It's very difficult to try to predict that as a carrier building out in a market. Now, that's one aspect. The second is the intent. Is my intent to open this up as an open gateway, as a shared service to others? Because if your intent is no, well, then you're going to intentionally build it in such a way you can defend that position. And I have seen this time and time again where, you build a tower in Yellowknife 1 foot less than the requirement for public consultation. It also happens to be small enough you could justify there's no way SSi could put an antenna on there, even though it's in a great location next to the airport we'd all like to be at, for example. So the intent of Kimmerlook was to build a business model and a business case that did not require us to be the dominant carrier in any market. It required somebody to build proper infrastructure sized for the consumers, not the entrant's intent, sized for the population regardless of the entrant. But that means designing differently. That means designing secure and non-secure facilities in a remote community of 500 people. That means intentionally building an open gateway so that it can support competition. That's what Kimmerlook is all about, and it really comes down to the intent.
Thank you. So if you will indulge me with one more hypothetical. So assuming you did avail yourself of the Competition Bureau's model and you decided to build out, and you built out also some of the wholesale backbone infrastructure, you mentioned that a 5-year hard stop would not be tenable. Would you have an opinion if the Commission were to impose a hard stop? What would be an appropriate timeline?
None, genuinely. The concerns I had with an MVNO earlier when you're building out your own network stand, and there's no timeline for that. Probably the only thing the Commission could do, if you are worried about this, is have another hearing like this to determine whether or not conditions have been met. But as Jeff has pointed out a number of times, each micro-region of the country is going to be specific as to whether or not there is adequate competition or adequate achievement of build-out or MVNO status. I'm not sure what you're even going to look at to shut down an MVNO. It will be extremely complex.
To add to that, just to give you a simple but obvious example, the backbone subsidy programs that come out differentiate between a satellite served and a terrestrial market because they are so dramatically different in terms of funding requirements, design, timing. We operate in remote and rural areas. we get one sea lift a year. If a decision is made in November, we can probably hit it that year. Or in January, we can probably hit it. If the decision is made in April, there's no way. So you've lost a whole nother year, right? So is that an important thing? Well, it is if it's year 4 of 5 and you're on your last 2 communities you're trying to build. So it then becomes very slippery for you on the regulatory side to carve out all these exceptions, because I don't imagine Nunavut's the only unique area. I mean, I'm sure there are many, many people in this country that would say that, and I would agree, that their region have as many unique challenges as ours, and they would have to be taken into account, or it would not be, it would fit the 1/3 of the country that we saw represented on the Competition Bureau's image. And I don't mean to, point out the Competition Bureau's image. It was quite fine. It was more the fact that 2/3 of Canada is rural, right? It's the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. It's the resources. It's the Northwest Passage. It's where we want people to be living. And we are not supporting that infrastructure. That was a bit long, but I think you get the point.
If I can just add one other thing, too, because I'm sorry, I apologize for this, but these are our opportunity to make the points. A fundamental flaw of the Bureau's position is that you have to have spectrum before you can become an MVNO. It's a fundamental flaw. And Cogeco, for whatever criticism was aimed at their position, they have tried and they've been unable to acquire spectrum. As we mentioned to you, we have participated in 6 successive mobile spectrum auctions, never to be able to justify paying the price for that spectrum. Richard Branson, probably the most successful MVNO in the world with Virgin, has never had an intention to acquire spectrum. So the proposition that you're going to have to be weaned off of your MVNO and onto a network built with your spectrum presupposes that you've already gained that spectrum, which presupposes that there's going to be a real high barrier to MVNO access, which denies, once again, the hallmarks of competition, which is innovation. It's some kid who wants to experiment with something. It's wireless. I don't want to call them a kid, but they're certainly younger than I am, having a good idea that they'd like to play with. But to have a barrier to entry being spectrum acquisition, they'll never get in. You're killing them before they can even start. And you're equally killing them if there's an ex post facto shutting down because they don't have spectrum. The fact that they can start without spectrum, let's say you modify slightly the Bureau's proposal, that doesn't mean they're going to be successfully able to obtain it after. We haven't been able to. We have lots. I don't want to complain about what we have in Nunavut and the Northwest Territories and Yukon, but we've attained that through ways other than mobile spectrum auctions.
Great. Thank you very much. No more questions.
Commissioner Levy.
You've talked about the right to fail, that a new regime should be open enough so that there's no guarantees for success. But it's a wide open range. But we do have to consider, as a commission, the damage to consumers that can entail from failure. So, do you have any thoughts on how we might strike that balance?
I think in the context of this hearing and the question being, do we mandate an MVNO and under what guidelines? The goal is to bring competition, to bring diversity, to bring innovation into the market. Ultimately, the goal is to benefit the consumer. The concept of opening up a site to an MVNO assumes there's already an operator there. And if there's already an operator there and the new entrant should fail, those subscribers, if they want service, are going to switch. We're going to see that happen. And there is going to be some pain. But, as Dean pointed out, the pain of suggesting that the network that you have built as an MVNO in the next 3 years needs to be migrated to your own spectrum now, that's as much pain as having to switch to another provider because we failed. Right? So I think fundamentally we cannot change basic rules. Things are going to fail. Some things are going to fail. And we cannot legislate around that. I just don't see it being viable. And frankly, we're not accepted from that, right? There's always possibilities in business that we may fail or somebody may fail. So I don't think we're ever going to change that.
Just to add to this, and this isn't an attempt to be glib, but it's a bit of a rhetorical question. They typically fail because they don't have customers. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And I should echo Commissioner McDonald's opening comment that you help serve a very challenging part of the country, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate you taking the time to come before us. Thank you.